Hello and welcome to Raisina Ideas Pod 2025. I have with me this morning Minister of Defense, Netherlands, His Excellency Ruben Brekelmans, and we are here to talk about European security architecture and all that implies for the world, for Europe and for India. Welcome, sir. We are looking at an extraordinary time in European politics, European defense systems, and the way European defense architecture is evolving, particularly in the context of the Ukraine crisis, Ukraine war, and now with the presidency of Donald Trump, we are looking at some fundamental shifts being undertaken both in the US foreign policy towards the Atlantic partners, as well as how European nations themselves are thinking about their security and about the European security architecture. So we have with us Minister of Defense from Netherlands to talk about some of these aspects of European security. Sir, if we can begin the conversation from your perspective, how does the European security architecture look today, given that it has had a long history of transatlantic partnership embedded in it? Do you see some fundamental changes emerging in terms of the churn that we are witnessing at the moment?
Yes, I think we live in historic times in Europe. This year in the Netherlands we celebrate 80 years of freedom, and now this week or this year is about the next 80 years. And of course what we see is that the United States is shifting its focus more towards Asia, which means that European countries need to do more themselves for our own security. But what we first need to do is to make sure that the Russian war of aggression in Ukraine ends well. And it must end in a way which does not reward Russia, because we know that if Russia is rewarded, then it will lead to more aggression in the future, not only in Ukraine but also in the rest of Europe. So what we should do in the short term is make sure that we keep supporting Ukraine, that they will hold the line and they will have a stronger position at the negotiation table. And second, we need to create peace through strength, which means that we need to create robust security guarantees in Ukraine so that Russia is not able to regroup itself and to prepare for future aggression in Ukraine. That's only about Ukraine, and besides that we need to make sure that we invest more in our own defense to make sure that our defense and deterrence is strong enough along the entire border with Russia.
So in terms of the peace talks that are now underway, what kind of preconditions do you see being imposed on Russia? Because the kind of language that we are hearing seems to suggest that there is going to be some significant concessions that will have to be made from all sides, but particularly on the Ukrainian side, it seems at the moment. How comfortable is Europe at this point with the way negotiations are proceeding and with the way the engagement is being taken forward? And what is the role for Europe there as those conversations proceed? Because you mentioned that, look, from a European perspective, there are certain things that perhaps are non-negotiable. But are you in a position to influence them significantly at this juncture?
At this point we are able to influence because of course we are talking to the United States, we are also talking to Ukraine. But we need to make sure that we get our act together as Europe. That's why we are working hard to come up with a proposal on how a military engagement by European countries could look like. I think it's very important that we do this homework and that we do this homework quickly, because otherwise we know we will not have a seat at the table. But we are now working on this, and I think we are making progress on this. But it's not only about the military planning, it's also about if there is a military presence in Ukraine, what is the task going to be? What is the mandate of this military force? What is this force going to do when Russia is violating any ceasefire, any peace agreement? Those are all political questions that also need to be sorted out quickly. And if we do that, and if we can come up with a strong European proposal, I think we will have a stronger seat at the table. Because it is about, as you said, it is about the security of Ukraine. So Ukraine should have a strong position at the table first and foremost. But it's also about security in Europe. So we need to make sure that Europe has a strong position at the table as well.
So beyond Europe, ultimately, in some ways, many would argue that the Ukraine war was also about the European security architecture and what kind of an architecture perhaps can be conceived of, given that on both sides, from Russian side as well as from European side, there are strong demands on that architecture. So when you assess that architecture today, and when you are looking at the next, say, a few years, what are the fundamental parameters you want to embed in that architecture? Given that now, of course, for many countries in Europe, Russia is the biggest threat and the challenge that they perhaps had not thought of, say, a few years back.
I think what's fundamental is that we keep our defense and deterrence in order. So any Russian demands on troops pulling back from former Soviet states is unacceptable, because we in NATO and we in the EU, we decide on our own defense. It's not that an outside power can decide how many troops are positioned in Europe or in any European countries. So that's one. Second is, as I said, we need to do more as European countries ourselves, so we need to invest more. There are also some strategic capabilities in which we are fully dependent on the United States. What we need to do is create a common roadmap with them, so that we can also show over time how we are taking over some of the responsibilities, so the United States can put their attention and some of their strategic resources elsewhere. Third, there are some fundamental principles at stake. So the fundamental principle of territorial integrity and the principle of sovereignty, those are also important. So we cannot go back to the 19th century, that big powers are deciding whether a country can become member of the EU, for example, can become member of NATO. Those fundamental principles are at stake as well, and are also having a big influence on our security architecture. I think those are the three main elements.
So just related to this, Excellency, I mean, a lot of the debate in this regard, European nations, European countries will have to also undertake within themselves in terms of the social compact that they have with their respective populations. How easy or difficult that would be for many in Europe to reorient the way economies are structured, the way the social compact is delivered when it comes to their own respective populations, because for a long time that compact had a very different texture. You know, the whole welfare state and this idea that less should be spent on defense. How difficult it would be for a politician to convince the constituents that, look, this is the new need, or do you see that awakening already happening in the population?
I think that's a very good question. I think what we do see now is a general sense that we should spend more on defense, that we need to invest more, that we also, in terms of our economy, that we need to transition also towards more defense production. I think many people agree on this. The most difficult part for a politician is then what to do less, or if we want to spend more on defense, are we going to raise taxes, or are we going to lower our expenses on other things, or are we going to increase our government debt? Those are the three options. And there you see that there's much less consensus. And every country needs to have its own conversation politically and also with the population to decide what is the best way forward. We are doing the same now in the Netherlands. So there are more and more political parties saying, okay, we should raise our defense spending above 2%, maybe towards 3% or 3.5% or even more. But of course then the difficult question is how you're going to finance that. And also in the Netherlands that's going to be a major discussion over the next couple of months. I think we have some time to settle those questions. Those are not easy because, as you said, we got used to spending less than 2% on defense. I think the most important, the first milestone is the NATO summit in The Hague. So it will be in June, where there will be a discussion on a new NATO target, a new NATO goal when it comes to spending. And we see that there is a big variation because there are still some countries around 1.5%. We see some countries, Poland, the Baltic states, moving towards 5%. And we need to make sure that those 32 allies get on the same page. And I think that's the key challenge now for the upcoming weeks and months. And if we then settle for a new goal, define a new goal, then every country can decide and discuss how they will move towards that goal over time. Because, of course, we do have some time to reach that new target.
One question on this whole extended deterrence that we have seen emerge in the European context. We have had some debate and some suggestions, particularly from the French, about the nuclear deterrence. Where do you see this debate going? Given the context that there has been nuclear saber rattling in the Ukraine war as well, and there is a sense that the threat perception is growing in that regard as well. So should we take that argument seriously about what the French are suggesting in terms of extended deterrence across Europe? Is there a debate going on in Europe about it, and how do you foresee that unfold?
I think it was very good that President Macron is starting this conversation, because if I speak for myself, I'm from a generation that who did not experience the Cold War. My worldview when it comes to security has been shaped by 9/11 and by the terrorist attacks that happened after 9/11 also in Europe. And in order to defend yourself against terrorists, you don't need nuclear weapons. You also do not need a major army, so a big army. You need to have different military capabilities and resources. So what I see in the Netherlands is that the discussions about the nuclear umbrella and about nuclear weapons has not taken place over the last decades. So many people are not used to this anymore. Some people would say that our nuclear IQ has become very low. So I think it's good that President Macron now is raising this issue, is starting this conversation. I think that there will not be any fundamental changes in the short term. If I look at the Netherlands, for example, we do not share any information about whether there are any nuclear weapons in the Netherlands, but what we do share is that our F-35s, our fighter jets, are nuclear capable. We were the first ones in Europe which made our F-35s able to carry nuclear weapons. So we are involved in this entire nuclear architecture, so to call it that way, or nuclear umbrella. But of course, it's good that we have discussions among ourselves. You know, if the United States is also changing their focus, whether the role of France and the role of the UK could change. But if you look at the whole spectrum of nuclear weapons, what the United States has, the capabilities, and you compare this to France and the UK, they will never be able to replace the nuclear umbrella of the United States. We need to be very clear about that. But to start this conversation and to have this discussion in Europe and also a country like the Netherlands, I think it is very important.
So just carrying forward that conversation on the changing nature of warfare, I think one of the things that we are witnessing now is this increasing use of hybrid warfare, and particularly we saw in the context of even the Dutch, near your coast, and cutting of undersea cables. How prepared are you as a nation to deal with those kinds of challenges? Because I think that would, in many ways, would define the next phase of whatever the simmering conflict there is in Europe. So are you comfortably positioned in that regard?
I think we are making progress, but we are not there yet. So what we do is that we invest quite a lot in our Navy and in our surveillance capabilities. So what we do see now, if there are Russian ships on the North Sea and they are behaving in a suspicious way, then we are able to detect that quickly. And what we see is if we then go over there and show us that we have our eyes on them, then they usually go away. So there is a deterrence element in this. That's working. I think that's positive. What we do not have in place is the right legal framework. So what we do see, if Russian ships are engaging in these suspicious behavior outside of our territorial waters, then there's limited things that we can do. So we have the discussion with some of our allies, our like-minded allies in Europe, about should we have more legal instruments in order to act if that happens. And third, we need to make sure that our infrastructure and also people in the Netherlands become more resilient, because we haven't seen that there has been any major sabotage so far. The Russians have not been successful in this, but of course this could happen. It could be that we have a power outage or an internet outage for maybe 2 or 3 days. And we need to make sure that people are prepared for this, that they are prepared at home, that organizations are prepared for this, that our economy is prepared for this, because we don't want this to happen and then cause major panic in the Netherlands. So we have, apart from our military spending, we have a big agenda on resilience. And we do see that there are many people in the Netherlands, also many organizations that are now starting to increase their resilience. Which can be very simple, by making sure that you have enough food in your house if you don't have electricity for a while. but also to make sure that your cybersecurity is rightly in place, that you have backup systems, that you can also, you have some cash, that you can do some payments if the payment system is not working. So we as the Netherlands, we are now starting to have a big agenda on this and to make sure that both people and organizations are becoming more resilient.
So as we conclude this session, Minister, I just wanted to bring the conversation to this part of the world.
Sure.
And one of the concerns many of Europe's partners in this part of the world would be that as Europe grapples with its own security challenges, as it looks at its own periphery very seriously, as it thinks about its own threat perceptions, would it reduce the salience of the Indo-Pacific in your foreign policy? Because that's something that that has been very encouraging part of European foreign policy landscape of the last few years, that there has been an interest in engaging more in Indo-Pacific, doing more here in this part of the world, engaging more with partners and allies in this in the Indo-Pacific. So is that concern justified? How far would you go in allaying some of those concerns?
No, I think the Indo-Pacific for us is as important as ever, or maybe even more important, because our security is very much interconnected and also our welfare is very much interconnected. That for me personally was also a major reason to come here, because I understand and I see how interconnected we are. If you take the Netherlands, for example, like India, we are trading nations. We are trading also sea nations. So to make sure that the international law is respected and that we have freedom of navigation, and I think that is key to both of us and to many countries in both Asia and in Europe. What we keep investing in this, so our Navy will remain active in the region. We also want to do more military exercises with partners here in the region. Also have more exchanges, whether it is doing a military exercise together or having people exchanges is very important. Also have our industries work more closely together. So I think there's a strong common agenda that we can build. And I think it would be good also in our partnerships to make sure that we divide the task that we have. So if the United States, for example, says we want to take away more military resources away from Europe and put it in the Indo-Pacific, and we want to do Europe more for their own security, that can be a division of labor, so to say, a division of responsibilities. But I do think that in the end we are stronger if we are engaged on both sides. So if there is presence from Asian countries in Europe and also the other way around, because we share the same values, I think in many ways we also share the same interest. I think it's very important that we project that towards our adversaries and towards our enemies. And then I think it's positive to be active in both continents and to show that we stand together in this. And for me personally, but also for the Netherlands and many European countries, this remains as important as ever.
Thank you, Minister, for your very interesting insights and for ending this on a very positive note about your participation, your engagement in this part of the world. As we enter into very uncharted territories geopolitically, it's important to have partners who think alike and who work together. So thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It was great.